You were the one that spoke to Mike Cohn, as I recall. He invited you, or it was something to do with Mike Cohn at that time.
I mean, one of the problems with this type of affair is you ask the people who were here very many years ago, and then they don't really remember. The same thing happened when they started finally figuring out they should think about who did the original work in quantum mechanics.
Yeah.
And by that time, half of them were gone, and the other half didn't really remember, or what they remembered was only half correct. I was lecturing at a summer school at Boulder, University of Colorado. In those days, the National Science Foundation sponsored a number of summer schools. So I spent 1 month there, if I remember correctly, and then we drove here. And in those,
it was 1962, the first year.
No, it was the first year. And why I came, well, it was, I'd never seen Aspen. I'd heard about it for years. And it was, as soon as I got the invitation, we leaped at the possibility of coming here. And it was quite a lovely place to live. The situations, you know, with regard to housing and the buildings and so forth were very different and rather more primitive. But
well, in many ways, it wasn't primitive. There was no such thing as condos. Everybody got a little house, like a kind of a chalet. And I remember ours probably only had either 1 or 2 bedrooms, but would sleep about 10 because every available surface was convertible to a sleeping arrangement. I remember where it was. It was 3rd and Francis. And I believe the building still exists. I go by it periodically to see. I think they've added pieces, but...
I have this vision from what you just said of physicists in sleeping bags.
No.
No,
they're just the 2 of us were there, but we had some visitors. But the point was it was set up for winter season.
Oh, I see.
Because in those days, the summer season was not really a very important part of the year. I don't know what the ratio was of the economy, summer and winter, and now I suppose they're roughly comparable. But in those days, the only thing anybody worried about was the winter time.
Actually, people don't ski anymore. We're in the construction business.
Yeah, that's right, true.
I'd love to ask the first question. Let's start really from zero. Tell us all who you are.
Oh.
Yeah, you go first.
Well, I go by the name of Grace Marmor Spruch. Spruch is his name, which I still don't identify with, even though it's been almost 50 years. We're both in physics, and I am now at Rutgers University, the Newark campus, and Larry is at NYU.
Yeah.
Is that many miles apart?
No. It may be in the future when women marry men that are younger than they are. So the woman will get the position first. But since I'm older than Grace, I had the position first. So we live right near NYU, and she has to travel to Rutgers.
Yeah, in fact, we live in university housing.
Yeah.
And what field is yours, Grace?
Well, I was trained as an experimental solid stater. That's what it was called before it was called condensed matter. But I haven't done research in some years. Now my thing, instead of research, is to write for the public. So books, articles, things like that. All kinds of things related to science.
Which seems currently to be very much on an upswing. I noticed...
No, it isn't. I think it's on a downswing because there was a time when I thought it peaked when there were about 4 popular magazines, like Science had Science. I remember it was Science 81, so it was 81. And there was Discover that came out then, and Omni. And now a few of them have there is no Science 81 or the equivalent anymore. And I don't know that of the 4, I think Omni?
Discover's still around. I don't know about Omni.
Scientific American would...
Oh, no, that's 100 years old or more. That's an old one. We're not talking about that. That's not necessarily... We don't really consider that for the public. That's for other scientists. I mean, if a physicist wants to learn something about biology, they'll read Scientific American. I think the physics articles are unreadable by the public.
Well, they've gotten lower level lately, which is some ways good and some ways bad.
We've subscribed forever to that.
I'm sorry?
I read that.
Yeah, well,
yeah,
but you have a
training.
technical background.
No, I didn't think of it as that difficult.
No, it isn't anymore. It used to be much more mathematical, for example, the physics things. they would write down fancy equations in a form which a typical reader wouldn't even understand what the symbols represented. It was kind of, I think it didn't make much sense. I don't know why it was so successful, but that's another matter.
Yeah. Well, it was well edited and it was well presented.
Yeah, that's true.
I just read Nature, and I was surprised how sophisticated it was.
Well, that's a technical journal.
That's really
That is not, they don't state that they're for the public.
Well, I mean, you have stuff on biology there. It's written in such a fashion that nobody but a biologist could read that.
Exactly.
And I'm not sure the biologist can read most of the articles there either.
But now this is a very interesting topic. It's not exactly Bernis's list, but the not popularization, but the explanation of science. Larry Krauss is, I think,
He does
quite
some
successful.
of that. Yeah.
It's called, Grace likes to quote the word that the French use the word for popularization. They call it vulgarisation.
This fellow Brian, everybody's very excited about.
Brian Greene, yeah.
He's done fine
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. Well, there always were books all along. The question is how many there are now, and I haven't counted, but my feeling is that there are very many fewer at this time than there were, say, 10 years ago or 20 years ago.
Is that a lack of interest?
Oh, yeah. The public is not only not interested, I think they're anti-interested.
That's something we've all been curious about, the role of physics in terms of popularity with the public.
Yeah, well, things like biology are popular because they're related to health, and everybody's worried about their health. But physics, I think, it's just, I just know that there are very many fewer outlets for, say, freelance writing, and my feeling is that the public is far less interested than, say, immediately after World War II, when the atom bomb was popular, and even for the next 20 or 25 years when you had space exploration and such. You don't have anything jazzy in physics now, other than some of the cosmology things.
Cosmology, I think, is big time for the public. And astrophysics in general is something that's easily explainable. That you show pictures and you see strange shapes of galaxies, and if the people understand or don't understand the details, they're still interested because it's something they can grasp. But there are certain branches of physics which are extraordinarily esoteric, and they don't mean anything to the typical person.
Strings.
I mean, strings, for example, don't mean anything to it.
But that Hubble picture of the Horsehead Nebula,
that's a beauty.
It looks like a giant doo-doo, but
Yeah,
it's
but
an
that's-
exciting thing.
But you could go
That's
to talks
cosmology.
for the last 50 years, and they're showing always these pictures of a few beautiful galaxies or whatever it is. So I think another thing that's happened is that biology has suddenly taken over. I mean, for many years, a university was not considered a respectable university unless it had an exceptional physics department. And even if they didn't make any money out of physics, they still had to have it. Just like in the old days, you had to have a philosophy department. And nowadays, they still have to have physics because it's necessary for biology and necessary for chemistry, but it doesn't have the sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Cachet that say, genetics has. And for good reason. I mean, I don't myself think that it's true that physics has come anywhere near the end of the line, but I don't think it has the kind of total feeling that it's the most important field, which it was for many years. And also it attracted, there's no question, I mean, you can look at the data, there's hard data on how physics students compared with students in other fields. And physics majors, when I was a student, could do better in English than the English majors. It was just different caliber of people going into most of these fields. And now there's still some very bright physicists, but in fact, many of them are foreigners. And a lot of your bright people are going into
Investment banking.
well, but also among the sciences, computer sciences, for example, genetics, is attracting some really smart kids. While most of the smart kids some years back would push towards physics.
Computer science is not a science. It's ridiculous.
Well, there
I don't think it's
are parts of it that I guess, you know, the logic and such. But it's true, a lot of it is close to engineering or whatever. But engineers, as you know better than we do, are very much better trained nowadays than they were a long time ago. I mean, engineers years ago, if they knew any mathematics, it was a surprise. But now they get pretty much the same. I mean, chemical engineers, they didn't know very much about I mean, they didn't know what a Fourier series was, for example. And nowadays,
We sure did.
I'm sorry?
We sure did.
Well, there are a lot of them that didn't. I'm talking about not engineers.
Engineers.
And I'm talking about chemical engineers in particular.
Okay, yes.
And mechanical engineers.
So,
And the electrical engineers were always a different. I mean, we were at University of Pennsylvania. That's where we met. And there they had the Moore School. And
Yeah,
at that school, of course, they were high class. So the kids
it could
going
also be that we electrical guys could model what we were about to build, and it always worked very well.
Yeah.
The mathematical models were pretty accurate,
Yeah.
but with biology,
Yeah.
so physics.
That's a different kind of
Well,
an
going back to the center, excuse me, because we were
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're
That's
off.
what I'm really
Yeah.
intrigued by. So your field of physics now is,
Well, I was trained as a nuclear physicist, and the secrecy drove me crazy. I worked for half a year on a problem that was stupid because the information available in the open literature was wrong, and people kept telling me to move to another field or to drop that subject, and I couldn't figure out why, because the experiments were all wrong, known to be wrong, but the people who knew it couldn't tell me because it was secrecy. So I
and
did.
you didn't guess that you were playing with fire.
Well, I knew something was wrong because some of the best physicists in the country, as a graduate student, were telling me that I should change my topic. And I had no idea why. Because it had not, the stuff I was working on was not secret when I started to work on it. And then it became important because it was involved in some of the bombs. And at that stage, it became secret, but nobody could tell me.
And you didn't realize it could be a bomb type secret.
No, I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know anything about bombs. I wasn't interested in bombs. I'm still
Are
not.
we at some risk right now with this Chinese paranoia of that same thing, that the government may think that writing on the blackboard is a secret?
I don't actually, I mean, I don't have that much contact with the people, the powers that be, but I half suspect that they don't really think there's anything wrong, but they know it looks good, and the vote will be in their favor if they start screaming bloody blue murder, that we're protecting America and all that kind of stuff, though I don't think it has anything to do with anything, is my own guess.
Now, you two were married when you came. In other words,
Yeah.
you were already well underway in physics, or pretty new?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I was working, let's see, it was 62, so I had my degree already, and I was working in a lab in NYU on soft money because he had a tenured position, and in those days there was a nepotism rule. I mean, I don't say that I could have gotten a job there, but it would never have arisen because of nepotism rules. And since I wanted to stay in the New York area, and it was a nice, comfortable life, and I loved the lab that I was in, I worked there for a number of years doing research on luminescence in particular. Time constants for decay of the person that I did my degree under, my thesis advisor, was Hartmut Kalman, who's the inventor of the scintillation counter, and so this work continued.
We just had a public lecture on an aspect of luminescence. It
What was
very
that?
interesting.
A public
Light
lecture?
from sound.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Which in
okay.
a sense
Yeah,
can
yeah.
be related.
Yeah. You should tell them about Cooper Union.
Oh, okay. This was before I came here, in 1958. I taught at Cooper Union for a year, and at the end of the year, the chairman of the department offered me what would be a permanent job eventually, and I accepted. And then it went to the dean for confirmation. He said to tell you this because Cooper Union's an engineering school. Well, the dean came back with this dictum: positively no women on the permanent staff. So I wrote this letter to the president saying that this is more appropriate to McSorley's Tavern down the block. McSorley's didn't admit women until pretty recently. But anyway, it didn't help.
The thing that's most amazing is not that they wouldn't hire a woman, but that they would say that they wouldn't hire a woman.
Yeah.
That's what I find
Yeah.
incredible.
That is pretty amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
Today, the poor guy wouldn't get down 10 feet away.
There'd be lawsuits
He'd have a
and
high,
God
squeaky
knows.
voice after that. But I don't think you've had a big chip on your shoulder about that.
No, I think that I have been extremely fortunate because I lived through what I consider the golden years of physics when you didn't have to be anywhere near a genius to have a very good life in the field, a very interesting life, living abroad a good fraction of the time and so on. And nowadays it's a lot harder. You have to be a lot smarter in physics in order to have
Why
that life.
is that?
Well, I think
more-
they expanded enormously right after World War II when the physicists were considered to be very important people. And I think those jobs remained filled, and so the younger people who are coming up now are still dealing with the people who are just at retirement age or, well, with plus or minus a few years.
Uh-huh.
And so it's much harder now.
Well, now, when you came here the first time, did you feel it was a prestigious place to come, or it was just a nice way to spend the summer with some other physicists?
I don't think I had that much of an idea what it was the first time I came. I mean, Mike Cohen called me up. I don't even remember how I know Mike Cohen. It was so many years ago. And so it was a great possibility. And this is not a complaint because it's the nature of the field. But when we came here, it was in some ways nicer than it is now because there were, if I remember, at any given time, about 20 people here. And they would just meet out for lunch, and you could talk to everybody. And you knew everybody, and if you were not in their field, you would ask them, what are you doing? And they would tell you. And now, if you go outside, you will find a block of 20 physicists around one table, and every single one of them is in condensed matter physics. And then you go to another table, and there'll be a different kind of a group there. And there's very little of this general kind of a background.
Even on the official level, because at that time, the physicists used to give public lectures in connection with the Aspen Institute for Humanistic Studies, and they really would be public lectures that the public could understand.
Right, sure.
Now, I think that they're on much too high a level. I think that the public lectures are not for the public, they're for other physicists.
Really?
Yes.
Because, as you probably know, we're very involved in that.
Yes, I know, and this is a complaint. I think that they're on a level that is not understandable to people who have no training in science.
Well, they're very varied, of course, too. For instance, Dave, bless him, was very good at speaking to regular people and making the cosmos come alive.
Yes, but you see, cosmology is an easy subject. I mean, everybody knows what a star is. That's easy, but all the others are much too difficult. I think the people don't make the effort.
I sat near you at the one that I thought was too difficult,
Well,
which was the demonstration that the fundamental principles all work. And we need 10 times more. It was a recitation of quarks and gluons and muons, and it was way beyond my true
I think that the speakers should be given more explicit instructions on the level at which to speak.
Okay. Hopefully that you'll help Bernice and Maggie and to see if we can't make that happen. Good idea. 3 cheers. I don't completely disagree.
Oh, wait, also, there were colloquia then. That almost up until the very recent past, like last year, there were lectures 1 day a week that were on a level that other physicists could understand. And now this year they haven't.
No, that's not true. There have been a number of. There was one yesterday, for example. There were a few, but there are fewer than there used to be. And furthermore, and I've talked to people around here, but they seem not to be able to do anything about it. It very often was the case that when a workshop was started, that the first lecture would be of a general character, so that people not in the field could at least hear what was happening in that field. And they seem not to do that anymore, or if they do, it doesn't work. I don't know what the problem is. But physicists are not great at communicating. Physicists get invited because they've done great research. They don't get invited because they are great communicators. And that's a problem. And of course, it's, I mean, there was a talk just a few weeks ago by Pierre Raymond, and I told Grace not to come because I said most of these talks, because she's not that active in research anymore. And as it happens, it was a beautiful lecture by Pierre Raymond.
Unfortunately, I did come.
No,
Did you understand it?
Oh yeah, I thought he was very good.
He's a charming
yeah,
fellow, too,
no,
so
he has a sense
But
of
it's so
humor,
rare.
and so forth. But many people can do great physics and cannot give a good lecture. So there's nothing much you can do about that, except you should change the nature of the invitation.
Yeah.
I mean, I once got very angry, not very angry, but annoyed with a good friend of mine. I was at an international conference, and he asked this guy to give a talk, whom I'd heard 4 times already. And I said, why did you ask him? You know, we've all heard him talk before. We know the subject matter. He said, he was my thesis advisor. Now, that's really not a good reason to go to an international conference and travel 5,000 miles so he should pick somebody because it's his thesis advisor. He was embarrassed not to ask him. So these are problems which are human problems rather than physics problems.
It's a nepotism question, really.
Of course, we have anti-nepotism now to some extent, which is not a bad idea.
Well, many people have commented that the early days naturally were unstructured relative to today.
That's one of the things that's happened is that they're almost all workshops now.
And they're too structured, so that you can't fit in if you're not part of the structure.
It's hard. There's no table where you can sit down with a lot of people.
Doesn't each branch of physics also have its own language, so that if you barge into the upper level discussion, you really only get a little bit of it?
No, but that's why he asked for the first talk of a workshop to be a general talk.
No, I mean, there was a conversation, I was present the other day, in which this guy who was interested in gravitational lensing was talking to somebody who was interested in condensed matter. And he was asking very rudimentary questions. And the point was that they happened to be together, and there was not a big group around of specialists. But he himself said, if I sat down with a condensed matter physicist, I wouldn't understand a word, because they wouldn't be talking to me, they'd be talking to one another. But that's the nature of the field, and especially the job situation being worse now than it was some years ago, though it's apparently just starting to get better. The younger people are pushed very hard to publish papers. So the idea of getting a general background is firstly much more difficult because the fields are so disparate nowadays. But then there's these extra pressures that are worse now than they were a while ago.
Isn't it true elsewhere? I mean, I've been trying to learn something about investing, not day trading. Just I don't get it. They say, well, the BZ32, and if you have them 5203 to 95, then what are you talking about? Huh? Do you remember the staff, who they were?
Yeah.
Was Sally here from the beginning?
Sally was here from the beginning.
I think she was.
She was from the very beginning, and she told me where to go horseback riding. I remember this.
In a way, she was important to the center.
Oh,
To
yes.
establish a
Yes.
feeling.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Did you get connected up in those early days? Did you feel connected at all to the town or just to the gown?
The only thing that was a connection was through the Humanistic Institute, which at the time was not entirely legally and formally separated. It was all part of one. Right. And so they had joint picnics, for example.
No, they weren't picnics. There was some kind of cocktail party.
Cocktail parties. And also, I remember one picnic even. And you would meet a few of the people there. Now, of course, many of them were here for just 2 weeks. They had these people who would come in. They were vice presidents and presidents of very big outfits, and they would come and they would have lectures at the Meadows. You know,
But we were able to go to some of those lectures.
Yeah, so it was a little more of that kind. Now the connection, in some ways, is getting a little easier because there's so many people who live here now, who know people who live in the town, that even those of us who don't live here on any regular basis, make some connections with some of the town people. But basically, we don't see very many town people.
Really? Yeah. Well, the townspeople don't see each other either. As much.
That may be, I don't know.
I went to lunch, he took me out to lunch today. I saw people I haven't seen in 10 years because I don't go to town anymore.
That's a little strange because you live here. And,
I live right in a short walk.
Yeah.
Well, I've been a dog sitter for somebody for close to 15 years, throughout the whole dog's lifetime. Somebody who works here in town, a local.
That's kept you're connected to the town
dog.
dog.
Yeah, to the dog.
No, you know her very well, the person, too.
Have either of you been involved? I really should know. I don't. In the administration and the worry and the raising of money and those
No,
things?
we haven't.
So you've just enjoyed the center as
Yes, yes,
people you
yes.
use.
Yeah.
How lucky you are.
I've never done the administration in my university either. So
No kidding. So you're a pure egghead?
No, he gets the reputation of being incompetent in these matters, and then after a while, people, he knows how to do it, even at home.
But you're still doing some research, would you say?
yes, I'm reaching the stage where I went to the Moore School pool yesterday, and at the time 5:30, and the guy said, "You're doing laps?" So, but
No, I have to say that he's doing some of the best work he's ever done.
Really?
Yeah.
now I have a good postdoc, but I still have
Yeah.
an NSF grant, and in fact, I'm spending a certain fraction of my time here writing a proposal for a new one. But my teaching career, for various reasons,
Yeah.
it terminated this year.
Yeah,
But
it's
physics is, I think, much harder than other areas to keep going. I think I'm probably the oldest guy around now because it changes so much. The things that people talk about now, the words, the language, the mathematics,
Right.
has nothing to do with the level of mathematics that I was trained in. So that makes it a little tricky to keep going.
But I'm sure you'd agree that the idea that when you turn 60 you're washed up, that's ridiculous.
I'm a long past 60. That's certainly...
It's a stereotype.
well, it has an element of truth, but I mean, there are enormous exceptions. I happen to have spent a few hours in the last couple of days reading some pieces by Beta, which he's just written, and Beta's, I think, 93 or something like that.
Okay.
But that's the exception. I mean, there are very few people that can go really long periods of time.
When you first came, did you imagine that the center would be as successful as it is?
Well, it was so beautiful here, and they had good people coming. I didn't see how they could fail.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I had no idea. I didn't know what the money situation is, what the funding would be. But if any place was going to make it, I don't see how Aspen was not going to make it.
Interesting, because I think of 3 eras where we were actually in trouble,
Oh no, I understand that.
at least at reaching this level.
Yeah,
Certainly Dave Schramm did a miraculous job.
yeah. Well, he
at
was
making
terrific
this
at that
building
stuff.
fast.
Yeah,
Yeah, he's very good at that.
Yeah.
And also the era in which Fermilab was being built, so that they built the building that subsequently got. It was very helpful because we were running out of local money.
yeah, yeah. No, I
Well,
mean,
we
there are
probably didn't know anything about that.
Just isn't that wonderful? It really is great. So you've just enjoyed the fruits of the tree and not have to fertilize it.
Well, but there are problems. I mean, I don't know what the future of Aspen is now.
That's right.
If I try to go to the Moore School pool, I can't get there practically because of the traffic. But it's just a gorgeous place, and you're inviting some of the best physicists in the world, and there has been enough money to bring people from a variety of different places. Of course, most people come with their own grant, but the Russians, for example, for some time, you want to bring a Russian here, there was no way he was going to come unless you paid for him.
I actually bought the Russian chair, and I gave money each year to bring Russians.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's very sweet of you.
That was the only thing I could see. That had a funny little earmark.
That's
around
very
it.
sweet of you.
Oh,
For just that reason.
But they have so many problems there. I mean, if I can tell one little story, there was one guy who was asked one day, he says, "Where are you?" He says, "I don't really know. I can't remember if I'm in St. Petersburg and what's the name of
or
the
Leningrad.
or Leningrad University, or if I'm in Leningrad and St. Petersburg University." Because he had been gone for a while and they'd switched one of them and he didn't remember which. But having the Russians here and having various Europeans and various people from Far East and so forth, I mean, it's a wonderful setup here. I mean, and some of these people are quite a number of them, are not only world class, but at the very top of world class. So.
But I was surprised by that. Were you surprised to find out what good physics Russians did?
Well, the Russians have always had good theoretical physicists. The experimentalists were a little bit less advanced because they could never take risks. In the Soviet Union, you did not build a piece of equipment unless you're absolutely certain it was going to work. So they tended to copy the equipment that the Americans already had. If you did something that didn't work, I mean, you're in real trouble.
And lots of things didn't.
Yeah. And of course, this is a place in which there are very few experimentalists, and that's natural. They can't come so easily. I mean, what are they going to do here? They have to have their hands on a piece of equipment. But the general level here is, I mean, some of the people here, I mean, Murray Gell-Mann was at the top of the class for years, and Phil Anderson, I mean, these are not just Nobel laureates. I think if you list the best of the Nobel laureates, you're going to have to include these guys. So.
Yeah.
And you don't need too many of those to sort of stimulate a lot of younger guys.
And I sort of have to put Bob Wilson on that list.
Yeah,
even though he wasn't really part of the center, he sort of was. And he was,
well, he had something to do with it. Yeah, I know.
Well, I think it's been wonderful.
Okay, well, thank you.